to our Ward 4 City Council Candidate Forum. My name is Deb Brinkman, and I'll be your moderator this evening. Today's forum is sponsored by the League of Women Voters of St. Paul and is in partnership with the St. Paul Neighborhood Network, ADIA leads and Sustain St. Paul. The League of Women Voters St. Paul conducts candidate forums to provide the public with an opportunity to hear candidates discuss issues that are important to members of the public. The League is a nonpartisan organization that does not support or oppose any political party or candidate. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates and not those of the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters Minnesota and our local leagues post complete, unedited recordings of forums. Editing is authorized only for official media reporting. Excerpts or edited clips of candidate forums may not be used for partisan or political purposes. We believe the success of our city depends on the values, knowledge, and commitment of our elected officials. Thus, it's essential for the public to better understand the views, opinions, and commitments of people running for elected office. It is in this understanding that better equips voters with information to make informed voting decisions. We appreciate the candidates and the audience for taking time to be with us tonight. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that you all have cards on your chairs for writing questions to the candidates. Once you have a question, please hold it up and a volunteer will pick it up from you. Today's forum is for the candidates running for office of Ward 4 City Council. Welcome Robert Bouchard and Mitra Jalali. Thank you all for participating tonight. The candidates participating in today's forum have all agreed to the forum rules, which were included in their invitation to participate. Each candidate will have a 2-minute introductory statement. The candidate will have 1 minute to answer questions and then 30 seconds for a rebuttal if necessary. A timer will signal them when they have 15 seconds remaining and when their time is up. We accept written questions throughout the forum. Questions submitted by the audience must be applicable to all candidates, nonpartisan, and must be on topics that are relative to the office. We'll have a 30-second warning. Thank you for that clarification. Appreciate it. Once you have a question written, please hold it up and an usher will collect it. Questions that are of a personal nature, embarrassing, hostile, or unclear in intent will not be asked. Questions similar in nature may be consolidated, and questions may be edited for clarity or brevity. Campaign literature, buttons, signs, clothing, or any other campaign-related items are not allowed in the room, but information on candidates is available on tables outside the studio. Please remain as quiet as possible so that everyone can hear. Please hold your applause until the forum has ended so that candidates will have as much time as possible to answer your questions. Please place your cell phones on silent. Members of the media may be recording this forum for their own use, and the forum is being recorded by the St. Paul Neighborhood Network for viewing by the public. With that, we'll start with opening statements. Candidates will have 2 minutes for that opening statement. And with that, we will begin with Robert Bouchard. We'll start in alphabetical order, and we'll be alternating questions and answers with every single question. And we'll do the last question at about 6:15 so that we'll have time for opening statements or closing statements. So Robert Bouchard, your opening statement, please.
My name is Robert Bouchard. I'm a lifelong resident of Merriam Park. I volunteered to go to Vietnam when I was a kid and worked in the computer field the entire 70 years or so that I've been alive. I'm opposed to ranked choice voting, and I would work to get rid of it. And I want to lower taxes and get rid of crime. I have been carjacked. I've been broken into in the last year, and I'm pretty much tired of the crime So are my neighbors. I have a neighbor who's lost $30,000 in the last few years just to crime. That's why I'm running. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Mitra Jalali, your opening statement.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Mitra Jalali. I have been so honored to serve our community these last 5 years now as your city councilwoman in Ward 4. I'm running for re-election because our work together is not yet finished. We have more to do to make St. Paul the city it can be for all of our residents. I'm running to keep leading that work. I want to thank our neighborhood district councils, SPNN, the League of Women Voters for hosting this important conversation. Thank you to my fellow candidate Robert for also running and for your service to our country. I am running on 4 clear issues that continue to be the most important in our city's future. First, we need to take the climate crisis seriously, and we need to take large-scale action to make sure we have a resilient and sustainable community. Second, we still have too many people in our community who worry about whether they'll have safe and stable housing. I'm running to continue championing safe, stable, dignified housing for every St. Paul resident. Third, every single person in our community deserves to be safe, no matter who they are, where they live, or what their background is. And so I have embraced a comprehensive public safety approach that really puts racial justice and racial equity at the center to make sure that we have safer neighborhoods for everybody, no matter your background. And fourth, economic development and building the wealth of all of our residents is imperative to our city succeeding and being an economically wealthy and prosperous place that is equitable. I'm running to keep leading neighborhood-based economic development for our city. And with that, I'm really excited for the questions that you all have and to talk about the work that I've gotten to do with so many of you and our community these last 5 years. I guess the last thing I'll say is that this is a tremendously important role in local government, and I take it extremely seriously. So I'm really eager to listen, to learn, and keep learning with all of you as we enter this next chapter together. Thank you for the honor and privilege to serve you, and with that, I look forward to our discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Mitra. And Mitra, we will start with you for the first question. And the first question is, what are the greatest needs in your ward, and how would you work to address them to ensure that those who need help get it?
One of the greatest needs in Ward 4 St. Paul continues to be having access to housing options at all income levels and remaining stably housed no matter your background or where you live. I have worked really, really hard to champion an all of the above approach to housing. We need to build more types of homes at all income levels. We need public investment to do that as well as private investment. We have record resources now from the state of Minnesota, and in the time I've been a council member, we also created our first ever City Affordable Housing Trust Fund to begin to address this. We need to reform exclusionary zoning that draws invisible maps across our entire city and perpetuates racial inequities and makes it more challenging to have a diversity of options to live and for people to be able to have access to homes. Lastly, we need strong tenant protections. We need rent stabilization that works for our community. We need all kinds of renter protections when you're trying to get into an apartment so you aren't discriminated against. And we need to also just think about renters in everyday land use decisions that too often are in the systems of our city still set up to not think about renters who are the majority of our city and who are left out of these conversations. So all of those things are part of addressing the housing crisis. To me, this is the central issue still facing our city in the future. I would say the next most important issue is the climate crisis and making sure that we have sustainable, safe transportation across our community to mitigate emissions. Lastly, I come back to just the core issues I'm running on. Neighborhood safety is such a pervasive, everyday reality that people want to see a safer, everyday experience, whether that's feeling safe at the intersection, just trying to cross the street with your kid in their stroller, or being worried about walking to your car at night. We need to appeal to our values of investing in people and making sure they're stable where they are so that people aren't turning to crimes of desperation or survival, and we need smart responses to the issues people are experiencing. More than only sending a trained officer to every situation, we need more options than that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitra. Robert.
Wow, I'm impressed. I think the most important issue that we're facing is housing. We don't have any houses. We're getting rid of houses and replacing them with apartments. That means you're renting. You're not a homeowner. You've got no equity. Your rent will go up, and you will have no choice. And if the rent doesn't go up, the property deteriorates, and you're living in squalor, and that will be the future. So I would advocate for family homes, single-family homes, reduce the crime by supporting the police and getting more police on the street, maybe training them how to handle the public a little bit better. And for climate change, I tell you, I own 3 cars. I'm thinking about buying a 4th car. Unfortunately, I can't drive all 4 at the same time. I can idle them at the same time. Maybe that'll put something in the air to cool the planet or heat the planet. I think climate change is a crock of Bolshoi. That is Russian theater, ballet theater. Bolshoi is theater, and that's what I think climate change is. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And Robert, we'll start with you for this next question. Our current zoning policies prohibit mixed-use zoning, which includes retail stores, coffee shops, restaurants, and other neighborhood businesses in residential areas. Do you support zoning changes to allow mixed-use zoning?
I would have to think about that because I don't like what's been done with rezoning on Marshall Avenue. They turned a lot of big old family homes into apartments. And I know that a lot of them are rental properties for the college kids, but it also eliminates the idea that we could have large families living in St. Paul because we got apartments, not houses. And, well, I'm not a very good public speaker. My opponent is very good at this, and I've lost track of where I'm at. So I will do what I can to support families and single-family home ownership.
Thank you, Robert. We've got lots of questions, so you'll have plenty of time to elaborate. No worries. Okay, Mitra.
I strongly believe that zoning is one of the most powerful tools that we can use to shape the built environment of our community, and that we need to make it easier to be able to build the type of housing and neighborhood options that make our city more sustainable, more affordable, and overall just a healthier place to live. I love the Marshall Avenue example, actually, because that is a situation where it's a major transit corridor. The B line, which is bus rapid transit, is coming into St. Paul from Minneapolis. It's connecting our downtowns, and it's giving people options to visit neighborhood businesses all through Union Park and south of the freeway. There's also challenges in Marion Park and Union Park around just having housing options for students that are often unattainable to them, and lots of longtime homeowners who are aging out of their home and actually want to give their housing to a developer to turn it into 15 more homes on the same spot of land and kind of evolving to meet where the neighborhood is at. So I think that in general, that situation is an example of what I've advocated for. We need to expand and upzone our community so that there can be more flexibility in the types of housing that we want to see, and more chances for people to just live and go to school or work in the neighborhood that they're living in. Additionally, I think that we could do a lot more to make small-scale development easier. We've passed the 1 to 4 unit housing study at the council, which allows for everything from a single-family home to a fourplex to be more easily built and really maintain like neighborhood scale, missing middle housing as options. Often these are the type of projects too that a local developer is more easily able to take on. And so it's also like working on the side of the housing supply problem, which is we need more local developers who understand our neighborhoods and are in this work. Lastly, I would say we need to reduce our dependence on cars, so we've eliminated parking minimums as another parallel requirement related to zoning and land use so that we don't have to have more cars in our city than we need to be sustainable.
Thank you. And we'll start, Mitra, with you for this next question. And I'll start with the middle of the question, and then I'll come back and read the whole thing. So the question is, what elements of a future corridor in St. Louis Park, or excuse me, in St. Paul do you support? The future of the I-94 corridor, which runs through the heart of St. Paul, is currently being considered by MnDOT through the Rethinking I-94 project. Sustain St. Paul and many others believe that the city deserves a future corridor that addresses historical harms to nearby neighborhoods, improves city connectivity across the highway, and reduces vehicle miles traveled. and associated with vehicle pollution. So what elements of a future corridor do you support?
I appreciate this question. I am currently a member of the Rethinking I-94 Policy Committee, which brings elected officials who represent neighborhoods like ours along 94 to bring our community perspectives to this process. First, I think that we need to name the harm of the freeway, which is that it was built as part of a large-scale national quote-unquote urban renewal project that destroyed Black communities, not just in Minnesota, but all around the country. And that happened to our neighborhoods here in St. Paul, in Rondo, which is not part of the ward that I represent, but as part of this regional project, I think it's important everyone along the corridor thinks about and centers the communities harmed by the freeway and how we can restore economic justice and reparations to those communities, and also just healthier, more resilient transportation routes for our community. I've advocated very forcefully against expanding the freeway. The State Department of Transportation should not think about expanding the freeway. I've advocated very clearly for dedicated mass transit lanes so that we can replace those hundreds of single occupancy vehicle trips with cars and exhaust fumes, worsening our climate crisis with clean, energy efficient mass transit. And I also have advocated for the Twin Cities Boulevard concept, which many community members have brought up as a way to essentially remove the freeway and replace it with a more people-centered pathway that connects our neighborhoods, allows for neighborhood development, makes sure that we are taking advantage of transit and walkability, and essentially undoes a lot of the harms that the freeway has wrought today. We need to break the cycle of car dependency, and we can't do that if we aren't willing to make major shifts away from the sunken costs of continual highway expansion, continual road design only for roads. It's just not sustainable with population growth on a pure logistical level. And then as we've felt from the smoke in our eyes and the stinging and the inability to breathe air sometimes this summer, we are in a real climate crisis, and we have to do something about it yesterday.
Thank you, Mitra. Robert, would you like me to read the question again?
No,
Okay.
I'll go ahead. I am totally opposed to putting a cover over I-94. It's a lot of money that your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren are going to pay for. And it's not going to do much good. I don't think I would ever go into a tunnel like that. I know that I saw this out in Hartford, Connecticut. They decked over a freeway right in the Capitol, and it is a mess. It was a terrible construction project, and it will be the same thing here. It'll cost a lot of money, and it won't benefit a whole lot. I can see maybe some wider pathways, maybe like a street walkway across, but not covering the whole freeway. Reparations, I don't know anything about this. When I was a kid, we used to play down there, and we were playing war, because World War II had just ended when I was born. I was a 10-year-old, we were playing war down there, wondering what was wrong with all these buildings that all had been destroyed, and they were making way for the freeway. Now, some people were hurt, and I was told by a liberal friend of mine, anytime the government does something, somebody's going to get hurt. Well, you're going to hurt a lot of people by spending a lot of money on a deck that you don't need. And to go to public transportation instead of my own horse, like in the old days when you had your own horse, you get killed for stealing a horse. Well, I like riding on my own car. I don't like getting on public transport where there is violence present almost all the time, especially if you ride the light rail into Minneapolis. I won't do that. So I think if we're going to talk about reparations, a good place to start would be to start sending money to Vietnam for what we did to them in the 70s. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And Robert, we'll start with you with this next question. Do you support St. Paul's current rent control ordinance that caps increases at 3% annually, or seek an exemption? If not, what would an ideal policy look like?
I do not support rent controls in any way, shape, or form. It restricts the landlord from being able to maintain his property, and it subjects the renter to living in a less than a desirable place when the property goes downhill. I refuse to support anything like that. I think you let people live on their own. You leave them alone, you leave the landlords alone, make it easier for them to buy property. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Nitra?
Thank you. I strongly support rent stabilization, and I also believe our community should view this as a multi-year process to make sure that we can annually evaluate the policy, look at its impacts, and make sure that it's working as intended. I have fought very hard to pass and win and maintain strong rent stabilization in our community. I really feel like it is the central policy that is going to be of utmost importance as I look forward to this next term, and I'm extremely committed to shaping it to make sure that it works well for everyone in our community. This is a policy that right now can stop the displacement that an everyday renter could experience without a limit on how much their landlord raises the rent. What it does is it protects people against predatory rent hikes that are purely extractive and can mean the difference between someone having a safe and stable home or not. I oppose numerous changes that were brought before our council that I think went too far in amending the policy. There's examples like removing protections for renters in deeply affordable housing or subsidized housing. It's not fair to say that just because you live in a subsidized building that should mean you don't get access to rent stabilization as a tenant protection. We passed a new construction exemption, and I think we need to look at whether or not that has supported the type of growth that we want to see in our community. And I think that should be based on data, not speculation from different points of view across the spectrum. I really believe we deserve a comprehensive policy evaluation to say, how has it impacted the ability to build new housing? How are we making sure that we have public and private investment going into creating new housing options, and that's an empirical conversation. It's so important because just like how you need protection against displacement from the home that you're in, you also need the ability to have a lot of different options if you want to change homes and you need somewhere to live. All of that is important. We need to figure that out, and we shouldn't be passing a new construction exemption if we can't say what protections do renters in those buildings get instead. And that is the conversation that I've been trying to have this whole time as a council member. It's not just an either or, it's what in every type of building that you live in our community, what type of renter protections are available to you. That's how you put renters first and also make sure our city can grow the way it needs to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitra. And we'll start with you for this next question. Are you in favor or against the 1% sales tax referendum on the ballot, and why?
Did you say this one's coming to me first?
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, just making sure. So I'm extremely supportive of the proposed sales tax for the city of St. Paul that stands to bring over $920 million over the next couple of decades to repair dire backlogs in maintenance and infrastructure that maintains our streets and makes sure that they are in strong condition and sustainable and usable for so many people that depend on them. We need to make sure that our park system remains the #2 nationally ranked system in the country. The park system is a sacred ecosystem of rec centers and programming and facilities and public spaces that all residents in our community depend on and can count on. And frankly, it's a regional asset because so many people around the state have an experience or a memory of coming into St. Paul to go to the Como Zoo or having a cookout at the Como Complex, or going to the rec center or the neighborhood rec center, even if you're not a St. Paul resident. So to me, the sales tax is one of the most important ways that we can get additional revenue for these regional assets that so many people around our state use but don't pay into. Right now, that cost is borne entirely by the residents and taxpayers of St. Paul. So that means that the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and frankly thousands of people who come into town for, say, a wild game are driving on our roads, and then they're driving back out, and they're not actually paying into the cost of maintaining that. All of our partners at the Capitol who are doing incredibly hard work on behalf of the people of Minnesota. We are the capital city of Minnesota. We have visitors from all around the state and sometimes the country, and that is an important piece of our place in Minnesota. But again, those folks are not necessarily paying into the cost of maintaining our roads. And so this is a way to balance the cost to everybody who uses them and also make sure that we can be forward-facing in our planning for the future. So I'm incredibly supportive of this proposal. I think it is, frankly, transformationally important for our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitra. And Robert?
I am opposed to any increase in any tax, whether it's state income tax, real estate tax, a new sales tax in St. Paul. If we need money, I think we can find some places to maybe reallocate some money. I remember when the last Coleman, Chris Coleman was mayor, when he first took office, he was upset that St. Paul had not had a pay raise in 10 years. And what he was talking about is a raise of taxes in 10 years because Norm Coleman wouldn't raise any taxes. And that's all we've been doing since then is raising taxes and finding ways to spend it. You know, I know that we'll continue to find ways to spend money, but I think we need to find ways to save money and not increase taxes. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. We'll start with you for this next question. Should the 1% sales tax referendum fail, how will you propose funding the needed street repairs and park maintenance? Will you support a moratorium on any new park projects until current maintenance needs are met?
I think I would do that. I would have to look at the entire thing. Now, as a citizen taxpayer, I haven't been able to look at the city budget. I haven't had time. I've been working all my life. But as a council member, I think I spend all my time finding out where every dime is going and why is it being spent that way. And I'm sure that if Chris Coleman could find $1 million to continue a bike lane a few years ago, after nobody could come up with any more money, that I think I could find some money too. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Mitra.
Would you mind repeating the question?
I'd be glad to.
Thank you.
Should the 1% sales tax referendum fail, how will you propose funding the needed street repairs and park maintenance? Will you support a moratorium on any new park projects until current maintenance needs are met?
Thank you. I really appreciate that. At the end of the day, what it comes down to is that the way that we can maintain our public assets at the City of St. Paul is through funding them with our existing property taxes, funding them with state funding like local government aid, which we get from the Minnesota legislature and has been very historically under need for, frankly, over 20 years until finally recently. Any federal funds that can supplement what we're trying to do. And we already know that with more support than ever, right, from the American Rescue Plan Act, from the federal government, from the historic trifecta legislature that gave a lot of return to our communities, and then all of the needs we're trying to balance with local property taxes. We know that there's a backlog that won't actually change unless we do something like pass a local option sales tax. So this is about making sure we're correcting historic disinvestment that has made our communities inequitable. It has made roads in various parts of the city worse than others. It has made roads everywhere worse than in other places, frankly. We are talking about correcting an historic wrong, and if we don't have this option, it will be, frankly, very challenging to keep up at the level that I know my constituents expect their roads and city services and parks to maintain. I would strongly oppose a moratorium on any type of parks expansion or programming. We don't need to say that we're not going to support investment into our communities to make sure we have a thoughtful budgeting process every year, like we already do, that makes sure that we're looking at the funding we have and how we can make sure it's meeting resident needs in every neighborhood that our city has. This is really important to me right now as a racial equity proposal. Right now, our lowest income, more diverse residents pay a much higher proportion of their income to property taxes to sustain more and more services that other people are depending on but don't pay into. This, to me, is about correcting that. So that's how I would stand on those issues. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Mitra. And we will start with you with this next question. Many residents feel that their input on significant neighborhood decisions is not genuinely considered, or that outcomes are predetermined and engagement efforts are simply a check mark on the box. As our prospective City Council representative, how will you enhance the public engagement process to ensure more meaningful community involvement in decisions with long-term implications?
I appreciate this question a lot, and I think about it very regularly. This event is hosted by multiple district councils who do so much work with city funding to make sure that people know about decisions impacting them that the city's considering, to bring folks together to talk about just hyperlocal neighborhood decisions, and to get more community input. This is organizing, and it takes a serious investment to get every single person who maybe works several jobs or doesn't have time or has childcare needs to be able to come to community meetings. So in order to fund the kind of conversations that we deserve to have, we need to increase funding to district councils and make sure that we're looking at goals around representation and making sure that they are racially inclusive by income, by age, all these different factors, right, that reflect who our neighborhoods are. So I say that as someone who represents 5 area district councils, which is very different than other council members. I would say, in addition to that systemic issue, and I think that there is a need for just more authentic leadership that is willing to say, maybe I don't know the answer, or I'm still making up my mind about that, or this is a really challenging issue with a lot of sides to it, so I'm going to listen. Over 5 years, I've been asked to solve absolutely tremendous challenges. I've served our neighborhoods through some of the toughest times in city history, and what I have done when I don't know what to do is I go out into the streets, I talk to people, I listen to what they're experiencing, and I take all of that back to City Hall, and I work to fight in the system to get what people need to be well in our city. So I think it's about having authentic, courageous leadership that's willing to listen and to actually not just try to please everyone, but to be honest and say, actually, these are the core needs and values in my decision and how that's reflected by what I've heard, and to do that work in earnest. I think it's about making sure the systems that we entrust to do that engagement have what they need to do that well. And I think that there's also more we could do to make, language access, translation, online options, more ways to register your input that meet the many formats and ways that our community communicates. These are some of my ideas, and I'd love to know yours. Thanks.
Thank you, Mitra. Robert.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Absolutely. Many residents feel that their input on significant neighborhood decisions is not
thank you.
generally considered.
Thank you. I don't believe that City Council listens to the people at all. Every time I've had an issue with a major project like a noise abatement wall along 94, where about 30% of the people who live right on it were for the wall. But the community council decided that we have to have input from people in Highland to see what they thought about the impact of a noise abatement wall on 94 on St. Anthony Avenue, when it has no effect whatsoever on them. Recently, we had a big expenditure of $114 million for Summit Avenue for infrastructure that doesn't need to be reduced or repaired. It's 100 years old, but it's not failing. We have to spend $100 million for infrastructure, and that would kill 800 trees. There was somewhere near, it was between 1,800 and 3,000 people signed a petition opposing this. There were 400 or 500 people down at the city council when they discussed this matter, and about 80% of them were opposed to it. But 6-1, it was voted to go through. I don't think anybody on the city council had any reason to vote for it. They had no reason to, they had nothing to gain or nothing to lose. But it was a done deal when it came down from the Met Council or wherever it came from. And the city council led us on for 18 months thinking that we had a voice in what was going to happen there. And they let us dangle there for 18 months until the final vote, 6-1. Instead of postponing the vote and studying the matter a little more, they just rammed it through. And if I'm on the city council, I will be listening strongly. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And we'll start with you with this next question. Yeah, we talked a little bit about this. This is a little bit more simply put. So would you please explain what the city council does, what policy areas can the council address, and what you see as your role on the city council if elected?
My role on the city council is to make St. Paul a safe city. Have more police on the street. I think we got 600 police and 300 around desks. I know I'm kind of rambling here, but as a city council member, I'm going to vote on things. And if I'm going to vote on things, I'm going to make sure that what I'm voting for is what the people want and need. And if they don't need it, and I see they're getting strapped down with enormous tax burdens that are going on in the future, I'm going to vote against that kind of thing. I'm going to look for saving money where I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Mitra.
I feel grateful to have had the opportunity to serve this community the last 5 years and to really learn firsthand, what is this role, how can you use it to improve people's lives, and why is it so important? The City Council's role in our community is putting residents' concerns to the forefront, working with the administration on their shared priorities, and making sure also that where there's a difference of opinion or a need to bring the conversation and push it further, that your council members advocating for that, whether that's about a project that's happening in your ward or a citywide land use policy decision. We have oversight of the budget, and we negotiate, review, and approve the budget every year. We're in the process of doing that right now. And I think in addition to that, we're offering vision. We have a chance to say, this is at a big systemic level what needs to be true in order for our city to be successful, and it's having leadership in the policy conversation. It's offering values and talking about how government can feel accessible to people. There are so many people who represent you at every level of office, and so many people spend their lives never even meeting that person or knowing what they do. I have worked really hard to transform that in the time I've been a council member. I have worked to be at every community meeting, to have my staff respond to every single request, or that I am personally getting back to folks, to make sure that we're doing things like visiting staff where they work and demystifying city government, following the workers who patch our streets with asphalt mix and talking about the asphalt plant. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hardworking people who make up the city of St. Paul that take care of our children in rec centers and make sure that our garbage is taken out safely and make sure that our streets are safe, and respond to some of the most scary, violent situations of maybe somebody's life if something bad happens to you. That whole entire institution is the city of St. Paul as much as our community is, and the role of a council member is to make sure those services are connecting to residents the way that we need and that your voice is at the table.
Thank you, Mitra. Mitra, we'll start with you with this next question. How can St. Paul be a leader in protecting our LGBTQ+ neighbors?
I appreciate this question. I am proud that we live in a state where we are now, thanks to historic actions taken by our legislature, a state where reproductive and bodily autonomy is codified and protected. We are a trans refuge state in a time where attacks on transgender people, transgender children are at an unbelievable high. We have passed policies that are going to make it more economically prosperous, and that people who are LGBTQ, like myself and so many other of our neighbors, have the ability to love who we want to love safely, to have access to jobs without fear of discrimination, to determine our futures on the most personal level about whether or not you can have children if you want to do that. All of these things make up the quality of life on a statewide level. I would say the city of St. Paul has a role in making sure that LGBTQ people have equal opportunity and access, as well as unique services as they need them. So for example, making sure that you have housing options, making sure that you have transportation options, making sure there's a wide array of jobs and ways for you to use your talents in the community through economic development, supporting local businesses, supporting LGBTQ-owned businesses. There's a lot of work within the city's human rights department to make sure that if you experience this discrimination at your job, you have somewhere to turn and you can bring a claim against your employer. And under the city's human rights ordinance, which derives from the state laws that you have the chance to make that right under the law. So these are all the ways that the city makes sure that those all are welcome signs really mean that. I'm really proud to also have earned so much support from our LGBTQ community. Our state representative, Lee Finke, our first trans legislator ever in state history, making sure the Black Heart, which is formerly the Townhouse, remains a space for queer people in our city to live life and gather and have entertainment, and so many other great businesses owned by LGBTQ people around the community, as well as safe and affirming programs in our parks through things like Drag Story Hour, our libraries. All of that's part of a inclusive community in St. Paul.
Thank you, Mitra. Robert.
I really don't want to talk about this. I believe in liberty for all. I celebrate individuals. If an individual happens to love a woman and she's a woman, okay, I don't care. I think we ought to make St. Paul a sanctuary city for liberty, for the individual. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And we'll start with you for this next question. What are your ideas on how to best address crime in St. Paul?
I have a really good idea. When the guy broke into my garage, I caught him. He went to jail. Every citizen should be aware of what's going on in their neighborhood. If you see something that's unusual, there is a place to call, St. Paul Police. I would support more police. I've said this before, more police. I would encourage them to believe that the city and the mayor and the council have their backs and when they're doing their jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Mitra?
One of the main reasons I'm running for re-election is to continue the work that was begun under my term in creating a comprehensive public safety approach that meets people where they're at and makes sure that our families and our neighborhoods are stable so that we can have a safer St. Paul. This is so deeply emotional and important to me as someone who has served our community through so many breakdowns from the realities that were ripped wide open in 2020 when the Minneapolis police killed George Floyd and there was civil unrest and so much devastation emotionally and some degree physically across our communities because of the still persistent racist practices of police that can cost people their lives. We deserve so much better in our state. We deserve for law enforcement to be professional, to be respectful, to be humane, and that you ideally get to live your life the way so many people in America do get to, which is to never have to worry or have to call the police ever at all, because your community is so well funded, from your schools to your rec centers and libraries to your child care support to your job and your wages and your protections, that you don't ever experience the kind of instability that can lead to people making desperate choices or being unable to break out of cycles of violence that are claiming too many lives in our city still. We've worked to build a over $10 million funded new community safety system that is operating programs throughout our community that are meeting young people and people who are experiencing economic injustices where they're at, making sure that we have investments in youth programming that make sure that kids are learning how to handle conflict instead of turning to violence or to weapons, making sure that people just feel love through relationships and don't experience nihilism and feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves and like they have hope for their future, and to also have alternative responses so that if you have a mental health crisis, but you don't necessarily want a police officer to come to that call, we have a trained mental health professional coming to help you. That's what I'm working to build on in our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitra. And we'll start with you with this next question. Do you support reparations? If yes, where would the funds come from? Mitra, that question is to you.
Thank you. I am supportive of reparations. I am supportive of just acknowledging the reality that anti-Blackness is built into the history of our country through the legacy of chattel slavery, that it has robbed people of their lives, of their wealth, of their generational opportunity, and that in order to rectify that, we need to actually look at how has harm and opportunity been taken from people and been inflicted, and what is it going to take to actually reset the African Americans in our community who have experienced that loss on a fundamentally better path, when we know in Minnesota those disparities are everywhere. Home ownership gaps by race, one of the worst in the nation. Minnesota consistently ranked one of the worst places in the country for Black people to live. This is shameful for me as someone who is born and raised here and loves everyone in my community. So what we need to do is, I think, support the work of our local reparations commission that was formed, that has commissioners that want to begin to direct this policy conversation, who have those lived experiences and can talk about this is how I could have my life be on a better path through monetary compensation for what was taken, in addition to the emotional, physical, spiritual harm. So I want to center the voices of impacted Black people in that conversation. I think that is the imperative starting point. I would say, in addition to that, we need to connect that conversation to what's happened at the state with important, sweeping legislation meant to also undo the harms of racist drug policy, things like legalizing marijuana and expunging past offenses and making sure that there's actual reparations funding from cannabis sales to go back into and reinvest in Black communities harmed by the war on drugs. So these are just the beginnings of types of things that I think are important, and I am very eager to explore that conversation with our community further.
Thank you. Robert?
Well, that's a nice answer. Reparations, for people in Minnesota to pay reparations to some race that Minnesota is responsible for freeing of slaves. If you look back to the Civil War, you find that Colonel Colville, I believe he was a colonel, from Red Wing, led a charge at Pickett's, stopped Pickett and turned the tide of the Battle of Gettysburg, which won the Civil War, which freed the slaves. So why would people from Minnesota have to pay reparations? I don't understand it. If you want to pay reparations to somebody, let's start with Vietnam. We've killed a lot of people in Southeast Asia to keep Lyndon Johnson out of jail. I saw a lot of people die over there to keep Lyndon Johnson out of jail. And we lost the damn war because of the Democrats who cut the funding, who wouldn't let us win the war. And that's why we have so many Asians here. And I welcome them because they were my allies in the war. No reparations, no, none whatsoever. Not one tax dollar for reparations for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And we'll start with you for this next question. What would you support an ordinance to enhance tenant protections in the city of St. Paul?
I can't think of anything. If some tenant came up to me and explained what his serious problem was, maybe there'd be a law on the books already to defend him. I have no idea. I'm not a landlord, don't want to be a landlord, and I don't want to have a majority of the people in the city being renters. I want them to be homeowners and property owners. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Mitra.
As your council member, I have worked incredibly hard to center and support and protect renters to make sure that they have just as much opportunity in the housing market, that we are thinking about home in our community as a human need that the government is responsible to address, not something that maybe if you're lucky and win the lottery or were born into the right family, you can afford somewhere to live and not be homeless, right? This is a racial and civil human rights and social justice issue. So I have championed many renter protection policies and protections, from rent stabilization to a series of reforms to the way landlords do renter screening, so that if you have irrelevant criminal, credit, or rental history, that you are not precluded from getting access to an apartment. I had a renter come up to me and tell me that my policy that we passed helped him get thousands of dollars back from his landlord because they were trying to charge him 3 times the security deposit to get into his apartment because he had a minor criminal record that he had done his time for and was trying to rebuild his life. And then they said, actually, under this local policy that the city of St. Paul has called safe housing, we can't do that to you. So here are your thousands of dollars back. You just can't hear stories like that and think, oh, this status quo is acceptable for our community. And you know that the folks who are most impacted by that are most likely to be people of color, of all different backgrounds, experiencing all of these different types of racist systems at the same time. So yes, we need stronger renter protections in the city of St. Paul, because that's who half of our community is, and they deserve to have stability in their day-to-day life, having the guarantee that they get to have home, something that if you can afford to have, you get to experience the peace and calm of that. We need to make policies and investments that make sure everyone has that no matter their income. So I will continue fighting for renters in St. Paul, and I'm very proud of my work in this area, and I hope to continue it with all of you who care about renters too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitra. And we'll start with you with this next question. One more question on housing. What do you see as the most promising strategies to increase the supply of affordable housing in St. Paul?
I think there are a few things. One, continuing our zoning reforms that eliminate needless requirements on all different kinds of new housing. So eliminating exclusionary zoning like single-family only zoning, allowing multifamily housing everywhere, upzoning anywhere that we can across the city, supporting small-scale housing like accessory dwelling units, which is basically like a small home on an existing lot that some of our zoning already supports, but we could do more to make it actually possible. All of that work is important so that we can actually capture private investment that is willing and trying to buy those kinds of homes and make sure that we can, build those types of homes all across the community. The second is we need to actually take on the funding gaps that are so prevalent to make housing that is deeply affordable to the lowest income renters and families who are working incredibly hard and are priced out of our city. We have a $1 billion housing bill that was passed by the legislature, and for the first time ever, there are millions and millions of dollars available for what's called gap financing, which is being able to take the gap that would get it from affordable to maybe like someone making 60% of the area median income and make it more affordable to our lowest income residents, right? That's millions of dollars in public investment that goes into buildings that we help build that are there as part of the tax base and remain that way in perpetuity. That's all important. Lastly, we need to make sure we don't lose affordable housing that's already existing. There are old buildings all across our community. You've walked by them hundreds of times. I've lived in several of them throughout my lifetime, and they need upkeep. They need investment to stay nice, to have upgrades. Things get old and they break down, including buildings. We need to make sure that people can have access to funds that keep up existing affordable housing, that if we actually don't maintain it, it will reach that tipping point and then someone will tear it down and build something new, which isn't always the worst thing, but let's keep housing that's affordable right now in good shape through investment.
Thank you, Mitra. Robert.
Well, that's a tough one. So well, that was a long answer. I'm stuck on this. You want to raise taxes on people who can't afford houses with the 1% reparation tax or pothole tax. Years ago, you could go over to the east side of St. Paul and buy 5 houses for $100,000. That's affordable housing. I think there's a guy who used to be president who could afford houses all over the world and take the money out of his pocket. I don't know what affordable housing is. When I bought my house 30 years ago or more, I could afford it because I worked my butt off for it. I had to make certain benchmarks, certain amount of money in the bank, have a job for a certain amount of time, and I was able to buy the house. And I have 100% equity in that house. That's what equity is to me. I own that house free and clear. I rent the property from the city, I understand that, but the house is mine. And that's what people need to do, is own houses. And whatever I can do to help people own houses, whether that be police enforcement of laws or holding taxes down, I will do it as a councilman. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll start with you with this next question. We have a couple questions on streets now. Snow plowing needs improvement. Oftentimes, residents' streets go days after a snow event, and by the time the plows come through, the snow is already packed down, and so the snow plowing has a little effect. How will you work to ensure that our city streets are plowed in a more timely manner?
I think I'd have to talk to Public Works about that. For potholes alone, I picked up pieces of the street and brought it down to the Public Works Department and said, you need to patch these potholes, and they'll do it within a couple hours. Street maintenance in the winter, that's a Public Works problem that we need to work on. I live on a snow emergency. I don't have a problem with it. I know the side streets got really terrible last year. There's a lot of people out there looking for jobs, I hear. There's a lot of people hiring, but there's nobody taking the jobs. There's a reason for that, too. I would just have to work with Public Works to make sure the streets are done right. And if that includes towing cars, that's what'll happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Mitra?
Thank you. This is one of the most common issues that I hear about as a council member and that I work on. I would say I've learned a few things over the years. One of the leading reasons why a street doesn't get cleared is that despite many, many efforts to get residents to move their cars into places where it physically clears the road so that the plow can clear the street, the cars remain on the side, and so the plow doesn't get there in time, or it takes multiple passes, and then when you multiply that by like hundreds of miles citywide, it means there's delays. So I think that we need to come up with even more parking solutions for people during snow emergencies or near snow emergency type situations, so that folks have a place to relocate their car, so that the plows can get down the street on their first pass, and that people can experience quick, expedient snow removal that is just essential for everyday life, to get out, to get to your job, if you're on daycare duty, whatever, right? So I think that's one thing that we've started to get better at as a community or as a city is getting more alerts out through the system, using an all-hands-on-deck media strategy to make sure people understand. We really need folks to help us help you move your car. I think we've done a lot to repurpose all this existing just like parking space that's sitting there, parking ramps downtown where nobody's in them. Lots around Allianz Field, just all these places where you can relocate your car temporarily so that we can clear your road. So I think that's one learning I've had is just so much of the time it's actually, if that route is coming down, if that plow driver is there, but it can't physically do the work it needs to do, then the city actually did do its part. So we got to help our people in getting to that spot where everybody gets their road plowed. I certainly would support more funding in general, just to have more routes. We did put more funding into things like modernizing our systems. So many of our drivers are out there with a paper clipboard, and you know what? They're amazing workers. They know those routes. They've been driving them for years. And as our city grows and becomes more complex with more of an expanded road network, we got to make sure that we have a database and that we can manage the work every snow event. So those are some of the things I've learned we could do better.
Thank you, Mitra. And Mitra, we'll start with you with this next question. Again, one more question on streets. Would you encourage the city to consider redesigning streets to reduce speeds and increase safety for pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers when streets are being repaired or reconstructed?
1,000%. I think this is one of the most systemic things that we could do as a city to transform how it feels, the experiences people have. It connects to the plowing conversation we were just having. It connects to the sales tax conversation, right, and the wear and tear on our roads. All of these little actions add up to the way our infrastructure is sustainable over time. And we have to start reducing the amount of trips that residents take around the community by car. Right now in St. Paul, there's a lot of trips that people take, including myself, that are maybe like a 10-minute bike ride or a short transit trip, but we haven't yet made it able to replace that car trip through the way we've designed the roads or the way that we've allowed people to have options to get around through like bikes and transit other ways. So folks are in their cars still. And I think in an urban environment in the capital city, in the city of St. Paul, that if you don't want to own a car, you shouldn't have to be able to afford one to live your life. That is just a orientation that I think is important in the urban core, in the heart of our state. That means that we have to, at a certain point, start narrowing roads so that they're literally more accommodating to things like sidewalk cafes, patios, housing that is next to transit, more transit being able to get expanded because we're not depending on all those roadways just for cars. Like, there's so much land in our city that is only dedicated to car storage, and we just literally cannot afford that. We can't afford that for the climate. We can't afford that for our literal everyday expenses of living in the city. It's really costly to own a car, and and it disproportionately impacts lower income residents, and those are disproportionately residents of color, right? Like, all these things add up. So to me, safer streets, if we design them so that they're narrower, people can't go flying through them. I have one of those 20 is plenty city speed limit signs in my yard, but people are still kind of tearing down the side streets. It's not going to change unless we physically change the infrastructure, and with that will come many additional benefits for our community.
Thank you, Mitra. And Robert.
I had a neighbor named Kui. He was, I think he was almost 90 years old. He rode a bike, he walked, he pushed a baby carriage to move his stuff around. He was really slow. He could barely keep that bicycle up. He was crossing Cleveland Avenue not 15 yards from my house and was hit by a car, but landed in front of my house and died. Because of the traffic going down Cleveland, there's now a speedway because of the bike lane that's there, and then the street is wider. Oh my God, it made it wider because of the bike lane. Now I understand what's going on in Marshall. They're reconstructing the corners on Marshall on Cleveland, and we lost, I think, 6 parking spots in front of the businesses there. Now I understand about what reconstructing the roads is all about. Narrowing it to make it tougher to drive cars. People who drive cars, a lot of them, do it by choice. I choose to drive a car rather than get on public transportation where I can be exposed to COVID or some other terrible invisible disease or just plain violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Robert, we'll start with you with this next question. Can you describe a time when you've had to compromise in order to solve a problem?
I can think of a time when I wouldn't compromise to solve a problem. I was working for Control Data Corp. Well, I can't say the name of the company. It doesn't exist anymore, by the way. Thank God. I was working for a company that fired somebody I didn't know, unreasonable. They had no just cause to do that. And I went to the boss and I said, you can't fire this guy for doing this. He did nothing, and you're firing him. I demand that you rehire him. And they said, no, they won't. So there was no negotiation involved. My negotiation was I quit the job for a pay cut at another company. That negotiation ultimately worked out for me because I got a better job. But yeah, I know you have to compromise to get things done, and I'm willing to do it when necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Mitra?
I appreciate this question. I appreciate it because local government is complex, and for the vast majority of the time I've been a council member, we haven't had a lot of help from other levels of government until very recently. And our job at the end of the day is to deliver city services, make sure people are safe and cared for in the way that we're responsible for, and to always look at how we could be doing better. I served our community through some of the most difficult years in recent history, through the COVID-19 pandemic, through so many challenges that really forced us to just completely reconsider the way we were doing city government. We had to make principled compromises all the time in a really scary reality, a very scary reality that doesn't feel like it was that long ago. We are a city that people depend on. We have library services, childcare programs, we have rec centers, youth programs, we have our streets, our garbage services. Like every single day, there's something that the city of St. Paul does that touches your life and that folks depend on. And so we had so much work ahead of us to figure out how can we make sure that these programs stay running for the people who need them, but also that our workers are safe and that they have what they need to do their job. There was a whole period of time where there was no vaccine, and so we had to support our frontline workers in making sure that they were taking care of youth who depended on them, making sure that we could keep library sites partially operational, and we were asking our workers to mask up and to do that work. And so to me, I think that principled compromises are the way I try to approach the work that I do. You aren't going to be able to get everything that you want or that the community needs most of the time. What you can do is look at the situation that's given to you and say, what's the best way to get the best use out of our dollars that helps the most people in this situation? And we did that through all of the ways that we took care of our community through COVID. We're doing that now as we have this conversation about, look at all this additional funding that's come out on the other side for recovery and resilience. My commitment is to keep doing that with our community.
Thank you, Mitra. And we'll start with you with this next question. Voluntary assessments have worked in other cities. If elected, would you support voluntary assessment of nonprofit and religious institutions?
Thank you. If I understand this question correctly, what it is referring to is the idea that a tax-exempt institution would voluntarily pay into the costs of the city in a payment. Sometimes it's called a payment in lieu of taxes. So we have a very high percentage of nonprofits in St. Paul. Their institutional home is here. They don't pay property tax. Same thing with churches, and same thing with many private educational institutions. So, you know, this has been a topic that has been around as long as I can remember, and I do support asking our tax-exempt institutions to figure out, can you pay into city services in the way that you're able to, and we need to really design that program with those institutions. They're not all the same, right? A small nonprofit that does like financial planning is not the same as a huge private university. So like this is a policy area that I think we need to take on and build out with all that array of entities so that we are offsetting the current costs to the tax base right now. That, you know, those are institutions that are, they're good, they're employers, they're educating folks. Like these are institutions that are bringing a benefit to our community, places of worship, and there's still just a baseline cost of doing business to make sure that people have what they need in the city. So how can we create a payment in lieu of that pays for a certain need? Like, is it a certain type of road repairs, and everyone agrees to pay into some type of a project for that? Or is it a certain amount of youth services that would really benefit from targeted funding, and this specifically pays for that? Like, I think we need to make it clear, I think we need to make it proportionate, and we need to look at how we can actually earn and get buy-in and have that voluntary compliance and participation toward the shared goal of the community we all love and have chosen to be our home, because we can't require it, but we certainly should welcome it and develop it together. So in so many words, yes.
Thank you, Mitra. Robert?
Yeah, if someone wants to give the city money, I encourage that. That's fine. You can do anything you want voluntarily. I support volunteerism. Yeah, notice I'm smiling now for a change. And as a trainee politician, I have to learn how to smile when I'm lying. So I guess I'm not going to lie. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And we have one more question before we go to our closing remarks. So Robert, we'll start with you on this question. What are your environmental policy priorities?
I love clean water, and I will do anything I can to support clean water. If I find someone polluting water, I will do something about it. I believe that the environment we live in right now is 200% better than when I grew up in the 50s. The air is a lot cleaner. Our environment here is wonderful. I've traveled all over the world, literally all over the world, and I have complained about government in Minnesota in many places, and people say, why do you stay there? I said, it's the government that has to go. It's the best place in the world to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And Mitra?
I appreciate this question because one of my core platform areas is climate action and sustainability. In the city of St. Paul right now, according to our Climate Action and Resilience Plan, roughly half of our emissions as a city come from just buildings emitting emissions out into the atmosphere. About another third, or 25%, come from transportation, so vehicles with exhaust, like from the freeway to the side streets to all the vehicles that are emitting emissions. And then about a remainder of that is our waste systems. So my environmental priorities from a city perspective are working on following through on our climate action resilience plan and its commitments, making sure that we can transition to clean energy through taking advantage of things like the Federal Inflation Reduction Act, which is creating more incentives than ever for people to transition to the cleaner energy economy. It also includes things like grants for planning initiatives with impacted communities who experience things like being more likely to live near like industrial parts of the city where the freeway was built near them. They have higher rates of asthma. Like all of these things are part of the racism inherent to the climate crisis, and undoing them, we can take advantage of new funds that allow us to plan with our communities and dream big and think about what a healthier future looks like and actually build it. So it's not just about what the city can do, it's taking advantage of state legislation and federal government to really reshape our community to be healthier, more resilient. Your house should not leak energy out into the ether. It should be energy efficient, and we should take advantage of programs that weatherize homes and buildings so that you don't have high energy costs, and also your house is more sustainable. We should shift. I've talked a lot through this whole conversation about expanding the options that people have for ways to get around in our community. I'm on the Met Council Transportation Advisory Board, where we advise on where millions of funds go into transportation projects. These are just some of the things that we need to do to take care of the climate.
Thank you, Mitra. All right, we will now enter into our closing remarks. Because we started opening remarks with Robert, Mitra will go first. Before we do that, just quick a time check. Our closing statements, 1 or 2 minutes? 2 minutes. Mitra, you can proceed with your closing remarks for 2 minutes.
Well, I am so grateful again for all of you for being here tonight and for the chance to represent our community these last 5 years as council member for Ward 4 in St. Paul. I'm running for re-election because our work together isn't finished yet, and together we need to keep making progress for our St. Paul. I am deeply proud of what we've been able to accomplish over these 5 years. We have helped create a more sustainable city. We've expanded bike and pedestrian infrastructure that's safer, nearly 28 new miles of bike routes that have been the added result of hundreds and hundreds of hours of public testimony, comments, advocacy, shaping that infrastructure. We have built hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of new homes just throughout my part of the community alone. I've seen parking lots transform into multifamily affordable housing, things that are just more options for people to live, keep fighting for renter protections, and building on that progress together. We have organized millions of dollars to support our neighborhood businesses that were hit by the triple emergency of the pandemic and civil unrest and damages, and then just displacement pressure, just the market economics of the neighborhoods changing and helping them hang on. We've also been able to create a leading first of its kind community safety system, a whole system for our community to make sure that people are cared for, they're stable, they're safe, and they have investments, so that before you even get to that fateful moment where you're thinking about firing a gun, there are options for you, and we don't turn to cycles of violence in our community. These are such critical challenges. Our community in St. Paul is beautiful, it is vibrant, we are smart, we are thoughtful, we care about each other. I'm running because I love our city and I want it to be the best it can be. I want to keep doing that work with all of you as your councilwoman. Thank you for the honor of a lifetime to serve you, and I hope for 4 more years. Thanks.
Thank you, Mitra. And Robert, your closing remarks.
Thank you. I'm running so I can advocate for families and single-family homes in St. Paul. I want to increase crime prevention and let people know that crime is not a featured amenity in St. Paul. You commit a crime, you're going to pay a consequence. That's what needs to happen. I'm going to fight for lower taxes, lower spending, limit rezoning, and I want to eliminate ranked choice voting. If I'm elected, that's what I'll do. Thank you.
Thank you. This concludes this evening's program. The election is November 7. If I remember correctly, early voting begins September 22nd. I hope you all make it a priority to get out and vote for your candidates. Thank you again for our candidates for running. It's wonderful when voters like you have a choice, and that's so important. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.